Hello everyone, welcome back. Today we are on Lesson 12, Chapter 12, which is creating layouts using modern CSS techniques. What we're going to be going over today is how fixed layouts work, how liquid layouts work. We're going to talk about how to create a fixed liquid hybrid layout. We're going to talk about how to create CSS flexible box layouts and how to use CSS grid layouts. So far at this point, we learned about styling web content. We talked about font sizes. We talked about colors, images, block elements. We talked about lists and much more. But what we haven't really talked about yet is the high-level overview of a page layout. So a page layout is how a whole web page looks to the viewer. There are two basic types of layouts, which are fixed and liquid, but it's also possible to use a combination of the two, with some elements fixed and others liquid. So in this lesson, we're going to first talk about the characteristics of the two types of layouts, and we're going to talk about a few examples and how to use them. And then we'll go over a basic template using both types of layouts. Modern CSS gives you more tools for building web page layouts. And in this lesson, we're going to learn how to design pages using the CSS Flexbox layout module and the CSS grid layout module. Ultimately, the type of layout you choose is up to you. So we just want to show you what is available and what are the benefits, pros, and cons of using each type of layout. Before moving forward, we want to make sure you understand the CSS box model and how that works. And if you don't, go back and review chapters 9 and chapters 10 where it goes over that. Now that we're talking about layouts, we want to make sure we're always putting mobile first. The majority of users are going to be looking at your website from a mobile device. So when we're talking about layouts, we want to always make sure we understand that the screen size is going to change for a user. Some will be on tablets, some will be on phones, and some of their computer screens are not all the same size, such as a laptop or desktop or wider screen. So a fixed layout is pretty much what it sounds like. It's a layout in which the body of the page is set to a specific width. The width is typically controlled by a master wrapper element that contains all the content. A liquid layout, also called a fluid layout, is a layout in which the body of the page does not use a specified width in pixels. Although it might be enclosed in the master wrapper element that uses a percentage width, the idea behind a liquid layout is it can be perfectly usable and still retain the overall design aesthetic, even if the user has a very small or very wide screen. The main reason for creating a fixed width layout is so that you can have precise control over the appearance of the content area. If a user visits your fixed width site with smaller or much larger screen resolutions than the resolution you had in mind while you designed it, they will encounter scroll bars if the resolution is smaller, or a large amount of empty space if the resolution is greater. So finding the fixed width layouts is difficult among the most popular websites these days because site designers know they need to cater to the largest possible audience, and therefore you can't assume what their browser size is going to be. The liquid layout approach might seem like the best approach at first glance. After all, who wouldn't want to take advantage of all the screen real estate available? But there's a fine line to taking advantage of space and not allowing the content to breathe. So too much content can be overwhelming to a user. Not enough content in an open space is underwhelming. So if the screen gets too wide, the text will be much harder to read. So a purely liquid layout can be quite impressive, but it still requires a significant amount of testing to ensure that it's usable for a wide range of browsers and varying screen resolutions. So it's good because it's versatile, but it can get too large or too small, which results in crowding content or too much space between content. So coming up next, I'm going to share my screen with you, and I'm going to go over a similar example to what's in your book, and we're going to talk about how to create a basic fixed/liquid hybrid layout structure. Here's the basic layout structure in HTML5. And this should be the first step that you do when you're making a layout. Notice how we have a section around everything here, given an ID of main. After that is the footer on the bottom. Inside this section is an article with an ID main content. And then we have left side and right side, which is our secondary and tertiary content. First step of making the layout, adding the HTML. Next is adding the CSS. What we want to do is we want to define two columns in a fixed liquid hybrid layout. This is like the example in your book here. So what I'm going to do is add that, save it. I'm just going to show you what it looks like here. So to get from the HTML to this right here, I'm going to show you the CSS. There's a minimum width property, sets the minimum width of an element, not including padding, borders, or margins. And we have the header and the footer. We're floating them left, giving them 100% width, and the same background and text color. Background's that pink, text color is white. Then we have to define the two fixed columns on either side of the page, plus the column in the middle. So this left side, right side, and content. Remember in the HTML, it was given main content, secondary, and tertiary. And then everything is inside the main. So that section element called main surrounds everything. I'm just going through so you can see. Like I said, you can follow along in your book. It adds to get to this point. And it says at this point, let's also define the content area so that it has a white background, takes up 100% of the available area, and floats to the left relative to its position. So adding this, we're setting up our layout in our area. So we would have like a navigation menu here. This is the footer, which would end up down here after we add some content. This is far from close to where we want it to be, so we want to add some content and add some stuff in that area. Next step, your book teaches you about this, adding these. We want the margin on the left side to be a full negative margin. This will put it into place. And your book explains more about what this does if you are confused. So when I add this, it's going to do this. It's going to extend these, and what you need to do is you need to set the footer position relative, save it. What it's going to do is put that there. But notice how the background here extends. So we want to do in the main area, which is all of it, we want to set the overflow property to hidden. When we do that, it hides this, but this will enable us to add more content in the center here. So that's how we get to that point. Next example is adding some content. So here, same setup here. Still have the section ID main, article ID main content, and all we did here was add a header and 2 paragraphs. The secondary content, which remember is the same as right here. We just took this section and added some stuff. Secondary content has an unordered list. 1, 2, 3, 4 list items. The third one, and the footer. So let's see what this looks like here. Notice how the background extends as long as the content, the footer's on the bottom. What we can do is we can expand this, make it smaller. Notice it will only be that minimum width. We can go wider and it extends. You have an image up here and the content in the center. So let's take a look at, here's that image in the header. Let's take a look at what this CSS is. We're linking to an external CSS sheet. So here the header's floating left with a width of 100. You must add position relative to the footer so that the footer is visible despite this padding. So we added that. I showed you that in the previous one. To clip off the bottom of the columns after using the margin bottom padding. We did this. I showed you that in the previous example. Remove the list styling on the left here. And this is just what happens with the links when we hover over them or visit. So this is how you take a basic layout and add some content in there and get started with a fixed liquid hybrid layout. Well, I hope those examples helped. Practice them, work through them, and just get comfortable with using those new properties that we learned. In your book, also at the end of this chapter, it talks about using modern CSS layout techniques. So you can do your page layout with a CSS table, a CSS flexbox layout, or a CSS grid layout. So similar to the example that I just showed you, you can go through and follow the examples in the book of using a table for your layout, or using a flexbox layout, or using a grid layout. Coming up next, we have Lesson 12 PowerPoint presentation, so stay tuned.